Hey guys. Part 3. What if Naruto became a heroic spirit and was summoned in the Holy Grail War? Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 8. In Darkest Night. I can't believe you just did that, Caster. Did what? Came the gormless reply. No idea what you're talking about. A muscle jumped in Rin's jaw. Really? You're going to play dumb now, after all this? Why, Rin? Naruto clutched at his chest, feigning pain. I have no recollection of such an event. She wanted to kick him. She really, truly wanted to kick Naruto right now, and it was only prior experience that stopped her. Thus, for what felt like perhaps the umpteenth time that night, Rin Tosaka dashed a palm against her aching forehead. Were all servants this exasperating? No? Just hers? Surely not. She couldn't possibly be the only one suffering here, right? Perhaps if she convinced herself of that, she'd be in less danger of dashing her foot against Naruto's shin. Please tell me you killed that archer, at least, she pleaded. Dunno. Naruto sing-songed back at her. Rin tripped over her own 2 feet and shot her servant the fiercest glower she could muster. What? I said I don't know. Broad shoulders rolled in a careless shrug as they continued their trek uphill. Archers tend to be squirrely at the best of times, and I lost track of him after my clone exploded in his face. If he survived that, great. I get to pay him back later. If the fall kills him, unlikely as it seems, then I say even better. One less enemy to worry about. Realizing he'd gotten a bit ahead of her, the staff wielder paused and favored her with a sunny smile. Well, don't just stand there, he chastised. We have an appointment to keep. Shaking her head, she hastened after him. Geez, you're ridiculous sometimes. Sorry, can't hear you. Arg. On some level, she knew she'd never truly understand his motivations. It served as a poignant reminder of just how little she knew him. Outside of combat, he seemed quite content to play the fool where his friends were concerned. If you were his ally, he'd go to hell and back for you. But if you were his enemy, spirits help you. She'd seen him beat back Berserker, and while he hadn't emerged unscathed from their battle, he'd proven just where the realm of his talents lay. If he ever decided she wasn't a worthy master, if he tried to betray her, well, she swore not to give him a reason. Finally, they reached their destination. The church itself was an admittedly humble establishment, an isolated abode standing alone atop the hill. A faint light stood guard against the gloom, a lone sentinel in the dark. It should have been a place of peace. Instead, it felt oppressive, stifling. A false shepherd eager to usher unwitting lambs to the slaughter. 4 walls pressed in from every side, the building constructed in such a way as to make one feel very small. When she was little, she'd always hated being here, always feared the ceiling would come crashing down on her head and bury her alive. Rather ironic, considering just who lived here. In all honesty, Rin almost expected another attack even as she stepped within. Aqua orbs flitted about, warily regarding every corner, expecting every shadow to spring at her. After all, archer and rider had already seen fit to accost them. Who was to say lancer or saber wouldn't do the same? Perhaps assassin was lurking somewhere in the shadows, waiting to strike? No, she needed to stop being so overly paranoid. If she didn't, this war truly would be death of her. At her side, Naruto sniffed sullenly. Smells like hypocrisy in here. Rin elbowed him and entered first, her footsteps echoing hollowly against empty pews. A single, solitary figure awaited them within, and as they approached, turned to meet them. Framed by waning moonlight, he still cut an imposing figure in the gloom, albeit an infuriating one. To say that Rin disliked Kirai would have been an understatement. There was just something wrong about this man. She'd never gotten along with him in the first place. Nor had she forgiven him. After all, he didn't protect father in the last war. Then there was that insufferable smarm of his, that indefatigable sense of being mocked whenever she spoke to him. As though he knew something she didn't, some great secret from which he derived endless amusement. How little she knew. Ah, Rin. Could a voice be oily? It was the only word she could associate with the priest's words. How good to see you again. Another muscle jumped in her jaw. Shut up, idiot priest. I'm here to register my servant for the war. Again with that faint, mocking smile. Yes, I can see that. Abruptly, that deceptively blank expression shattered like brittle glass and his composure turned stone tense. Those eerie dead eyes widened to an almost grotesque size, and it took Rin a moment to realize just what was rattling the war. The priest wasn't looking at her but rather, past her. Toward Castor? Why would he be focused on Castor? To her dismay, Naruto wore a similar expression. He even tilted his head, frowning. Have we met? Kotomine frowned when the word yes nearly leaped to his lips. I know. A hand rose, pinching the brow of his nose. It must be my imagination. Was it? There was something shamelessly disturbing about this young man, yet a feeling that seemed almost familiar to Kotomine Kirai. As though they'd met before, or perhaps known each other in another life. Another path. Another route. No. Impossible. Wholly, utterly absurd. Kirai was certain he never laid eyes on this person in his life, nor were his memories suppressed or erased in any way. He would know if they were. Executors, even a former one such as himself, had ways of guarding against such fell magics. Yet there it was. Try as he might to deny it, he felt a connection between the two of them, the faintest sense of nostalgia tainting the air, pervading his every thought. He could see this Castor, see him for what he truly was. His name, his motives, his wishes, even his heart's desire worn on his very sleeve. He suspected the same might well bode true for the young man. Such a fool, holding out for the Grail to fix his mistakes, when it could only bring cold, cruel death. Ah, but Rin was glaring at him, and he had a mask to maintain. Right, suddenly the servant known to him as Castor as Uzumaki Naruto, a dark voice hissed in the back of his head, clicked his tongue in mild irritation. We're going. Hey, wait. Rin jolted, perhaps realizing she just missed something. Poor girl. She was so easy to lead on. Kirai almost pitied her. Almost. Castor scarcely slowed, pausing just long enough to turn his head and incline his head in Kirai's direction. It was, by all means, a respectful gesture, not one smacking of their shared dislike of one another. Oddly enough, this set Kirai on edge and further fostered his strange animosity toward the whiskered warrior. He wanted to break this man, to take that overwhelming determination that shone like the sun and drown it in blackened mud. Anyone who was not Gilgamesh capable of provoking such a reaction in him with scarcely 3 words was someone to be watched. Rin seemed fond of him. The former was enough to be sly, but the latter gave him an excuse to indulge in his most savored of pastimes. Kotomine chuckled darkly. It's sad, isn't it? Naruto bristled. What is? That you'll never have what you desire. A blazing red eye reappeared over his shoulder. Oh? You want to run that by me again, shitty priest? Kai's smile grew imperceptibly. I meant nothing by it, of course. Castor stiffened, but willed himself to relax. Fine, then take back what you just. Like a vulture, Kirai saw the opportunity and swooped in. I merely said that your own foolishness will get you killed. An awful silence answered him, punctuated by Rin's startled oath. Odd. He'd expected an answer from Castor, not this sad, sullen silence. A staff clanged against the side of his head, shattered half the church, and knocked his senses into oblivion. Even as Kirai struggled to right himself, a clenched fist slammed into the side of his jaw, sending him reeling to the floor like a drunkard at last call. Surprise dulled his movements. For all his goading, he hadn't expected Castor to actually attack him outright. That he had done so willingly actually came as something of a shock to Kotomine. Thankfully, even in his inebriated state, his body still managed to move of its own accord. In the time that it took the blonde to reach down and seize him by the collar, a black key slid from his sleeve to slam into where Castor's spiritual core ought to be. He missed. Rather than stab the whiskered warrior high in the heart as intended, the thin blade took him low in the stomach instead, to which the young man merely grunted and headbutted him. Hard. Something cracked in Kirai's skull, his thoughts turning syrupy and sluggish despite his best efforts to muster them. Ah. So this was where he died, then. Unexpected. Eyes rolling, vision swimming, he could scarcely move. Where was Gilgamesh? No, that was a pointless question. Trying to find or control the king of heroes was akin to steering a hurricane. It simply couldn't be done, and Odorthatonerathert. From afar, he thought he heard Rin's voice. Naruto, no! Castor was of a different mind. Naruto, yes! He needed to kill this man. Every fiber of his being told him to do it, here and now. If he left him alive now, only misfortune would come of it. While not evil in the traditional sense of the word, this was a man who clearly delighted in the suffering of others. Yet something stayed his hand. Perhaps it was pity. Perhaps it was concern for Rin. Perhaps he simply wasn't sure what to make of this strangely familiar and now bloody face before him. They'd never met in this reality yet. Again, he found himself hesitating. As if a ghostly palm had laid itself on his arm, so too did he lower it. In the end, and against better judgment, he opted for the lesser of two evils, painful thought it was. It was certainly within the realm of his current abilities, after all. And it put him out of reach. I won't kill you, he decided at last. That might cause problems for Rin. However, grinning, he hefted his staff. Its many rings offered a soft, sinister jingle. Tell me, if you could take a trip, where would you like to go? Dazed, the priest offered a slow, baffled blink. What? All right. Mountains it is, then. Have fun. With a silent snap, Kirai vanished into thin air. To the naked eye he simply ceased to exist altogether. Only one familiar with the breadth of his skills, one such as Rin would be, realized nothing was further from the truth. Rather than eradicate the meddling priest as had been his first intention, he'd simply deposited him somewhere far, far away. It would take him hours, if not an outright day, to make his way back here. Who was to say what could happen then? Naruto snorted into the ensuing silence, the sound echoing hollowly in the now empty church. Only then did he finally remember his wound. After a long, ponderous moment, he reached down and ripped the black key from his stomach. Mercifully, the blade hadn't penetrated all that far. He could already feel his body mending the damage even as the thin steel fled from his flesh. He could also feel Rin glaring bloody red daggers at his back. Should probably answer her. Still, his blood was up and he wasn't certain he trusted himself to speak at the moment. Reluctantly, he settled for a spiteful spit. Serves him right. Rin groaned. That does it. We're going back to Ilya's mansion. Great. Just give me a second and I can teleport us there. No. She seized Castor by the jacket and shook him mightily. Absolutely not. Hey, came the immediate rejoinder. It's not like I pulled a lancer and went flying off the handle. Rin shook him as much as she dared without physically exerting herself overmuch. We are walking. Do you hear me? 0000. Lancer laughed. Nay, to call this laughter would have been a disservice of the highest order. A great whooping cackle erupted from the back of Ku Chulin's throat and shook his limber body from head to toe, the force of his mirth such that it nearly knocked him from his vantage point atop the skyscraper and sent him tumbling down to the bustling streets below. With a supreme effort of will, the servant of the spear righted himself, wiped a mirthful tear from the corner of his eye, and favored the fading remnants of the explosion with a savage grin. I fucking love this war. From here, his keen eyes had held a prime vantage of the chaos that had occurred only moments ago. Even now he savored it, turning the red bastard's fate over and over in his mind like some treasured gem. The sight of Archer scrambling back, a shrieking clone of Castor flung headlong into him, the fiery blast that followed, tossing the former into the city. Naturally, this meant one of two things. Either Castor possessed prodigious arm strength, very likely given the fight his copy had put up, or he was nearby. Regardless, the trajectory of that throw made it all too easy to track him down. But should he? And now the blonde bastard had gone and blown up half a church. An explosion like that was hard to miss, least of all when it lit up the night. Yet did that make it worth abandoning his master just to track him down? Firm fingers curled restlessly about his weapon for a moment. This war wasn't like the others. Not only were servants coming out of the woodwork left and right, but the Grail itself was in flux. For one who cared for little beyond battle, Lancer wouldn't have given the matter much thought. That had been before the damn thing started spitting out new servants. At one point he'd even sensed another Lancer. That shit shouldn't have been possible. Eventually, Lancer made his decision. Bah! Damn me for a fool. A single bound carried him forward to a lower elevation, blue-clad feet scarcely alighting upon the smooth surface of another building before bounding away again. Wind howled in his ears, but he paid it no mind. Instead, he gloried in the brief joy of flight before landing once more. 3 such leaps carried him out of the city proper entirely, and one more brought him back to the one he served. As ever, she was waiting for him near the damn townhouse of hers. After all, who would dare delve into gang territory just to wheedle out an enemy master? None that he knew. No, any self-respecting magus worth their salt wouldn't tread here without taking serious precautions. Probably wouldn't want to dirty their shoes. Ha! The thought almost made him sneer. Magi might be powerful, but in his experience they were often utterly, wholly naive. Little disappointing that. Alighting upon a ruined fence, the Blue Knight hopped down and made his way to their base. Bazette. Did you hear that just now? Seems like Castor's at it again. See what? His master in question scarcely looked up at his approach. Her gaze appeared focused on some distant point. At first she didn't speak, perhaps expecting the other shoe to drop at any moment. When Lancer didn't indulge her, she huffed and shot him a withering glare. Despite himself, Lancer smiled. A bastard blew up another building. Nothing terribly important. Again? Bizette slapped her forehead. This war is getting to be more trouble than it's worth. As though waiting for that very moment, Lancer uttered an explosive, body-racking sneeze. Ah, what the hell? Who's talking about me behind my back again? I don't know about your back, though it's wide open. As usual. Wheeling on the voice, he brought his spear to bear, and just as swiftly lowered it. The expressionless visage that stared back was known to him immediately, as was the danger lurking within. Though half their face remained masked, he recognized those startling red eyes, that stern visage framed by a dark curtain of bloody violet hair. For a fleeting instant, despite his instincts screaming at him, his concentration wavered. Crimson eyes bulged. Oh, fuck me, he whispered. What the actual hell is this? The newcomer smiled pertly right back at him. Is that an invitation? Then the blunt end of a very familiar spear blurred and sent him snarling into the city proper. 00000. I'm never going to church again. Rin palmed her face. Castor. No, really. Never again. Naruto rambled on, heedless of the disparaging look he earned in the process. That priest gave me the heebie-jeebies. Strangest thing though, I get the feeling I know him. Weird. At her baffled look, he offered a small shrug. I know I've never met him before, just as he's never met me. Yet the memory's still there. Was he immune to spells? Would he feel it if she shot him? Probably not worth the risk in the end, that. You almost killed him, she hissed. Ah, but I didn't, he sang back. I hate you. Loathe you too. Their trek back to the Einsburn mansion had proven mercifully quiet thus far. None had dared to accost them. Even the wildlife itself had gone eerily silent, almost as if it were afraid of being heard. Now that was a mite bit worrying, but there was nothing she could do about it. At any rate, she could see the little sprite's home in the distance now, peer at the roof poking through the trees. Perhaps Ilya would have some answers once they returned. Perhaps not. Perhaps this was all a bad dream, one she'd wake from any minute now. Ha! She should be so lucky. I mean, I wanted to gut the bastard, her servant admitted baldly, peeling back a branch for her to duck under. He just rubbed me the wrong way for some reason. With luck, he won't even remember any of this. I did rattle his brain a bit. We have no luck. Then we make our own, he growled. Rin flinched. Naruto, you're scaring me. His head snapped up and Rin caught a flash of crimson. Funny you should mention that. I'm downright terrified myself. Whatever else he might have said vanished in a low roar of dread fire among the trees. Could light be black? At first, Rin didn't realize what was transpiring. One moment the way had been clear for them. She'd stepped over an upturned root to avoid falling face first on the forested path leading to the mansion. Wouldn't do to make a fool of herself and fall flat on her face, after all. Move! Then the air boiled and Castor seized her by the scruff of the neck, flinging her backwards as though she weighed no more than a child. Her head struck a rock, her body bounced against the ground in harsh succession as she tumbled away, once, twice, thrice, and the world shattered behind her eyes as she struggled to come to terms with what had just transpired. Steel struck steel, the mournful wail of a corrupted light clashing against a thin metal rod. Naturally, her first instinct was to cry out. Until she saw the maiden in black her corrupted blade occupying the space she just vacated. Their attacker was, well, to call someone armed and armored short sounded like an insult, and insults were beneath Rin Tosaka. Nevertheless, something in her quailed when she looked upon the enemy's servant. Death. Those wicked golden eyes were locked on her, despite the distance, despite Naruto's body blocking her, despite everything else, she'd nearly died. If her servant had been a hair slower, a little bit off the mark, that would be her blood decorating the ground, rather than his. It's rude to attack without giving your name, you know. If she hadn't known him so well, she might have missed the tension in Castor's voice. The bleak figure turned then, grim golden eyes regarding the whiskered warrior blankly. It matters not. Her voice was sharper than any blade. I am destruction. Rin wanted to whimper. In truth, she nearly did. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Here was a pure being corrupted by forces beyond her control, a proud warrior dragged down to the level of a mere brute. Though that black veil hid her eyes from view, the fact nevertheless remained. Bloodlust radiated from her in waves, threatening to silence them outright. This, then, could only be Saber. Who else would wield such a sword, least of all force Castor to a knee? Because her servant had been forced back, fists clenched white-knuckled around the weapon. Somehow, her heart wept at the sight. What was he thinking, facing a saber in close combat? In the end, Castor recovered first. Rather than try to fight the blade biting into his staff, the blonde abruptly dropped back, allowing the corroded sword to sweep harmlessly overhead and shorten his coat by half an inch. In the same movement he kicked out and scythed the girl's armored legs out from under her, bringing his arm up to crash a Rasengan into her armored stomach. Naive! The newcomer snarled at him, only to nearly lose his head to that towering blade once more. With a startled hiss he brought his staff around to bat the sword aside. Riposting sharply, the blonde spun away and, much to her consternation, tilted his head. Hello, destruction. I'm Naruto. Pearly white teeth flashed out at her in a rueful grin. Nice ta mi cha. For all her severity, a crack etched itself in the woman's stony facade, a faint fracture breaking through those eyes of flint. Then that black blade swung back, forward, and all the world and Castor alongside it vanished in a writhing sea of black light. Have at you! Chapter 9. To the victor goes the spoils. This was death. Rin reasoned no other word for it. She found herself powerless to do anything other than observe, and even that proved dangerous in and of itself. Every blow rattled the soil and ruptured the earth underfoot. Each near miss shook the heavens above. Every strike rang in her ears like a sonorous bell. Clang! 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 Staff met saber and skittered away in a shower of sparks, a storm of fell magic and impossible strength. Here was a war between two beings who commanded power on a scale she'd never seen before. Any attempt at diplomacy had been utterly, irrevocably cast aside. One would live. One would die. Soon enough she found she had to run, just to avoid being caught up in the madness of it all. In contrast to the controlled chaos of Castor's brief battle with Heracles, this battle held no restraint. And yet she felt no drain on her circuits. Saber and Castor fought like titans of old, engaging a running battle against one another, spells and dark prana blazing through the forest in fell form of wind and fire. Castor was pulling out all the stops, all the tricks in his arsenal, every gimmick and technique he knew, all to stay ahead of that shadow-steep sword. By rights her body should have been a searing oven by now, exhausted by Naruto's relentless assault at the very least. So why wasn't she? Had he found some way to bypass the strain somehow? A ley line perhaps? Some trick with his clones? Or maybe. Castor ripped a tree from the ground to fling it at Saber, and she swatted it aside in equal measure. Unfortunately, the severed halves lost none of their momentum and Karo made towards Rin. She felt the color drain from her face at the sight. Questions for later. Running now! Oh, for crying out loud! Her voice rose in a wail as she narrowly evaded a towering chunk of blazing timber, another fresh shockwave further rattling her senses. Restraint. Both of you. Learn it. She ranted at them as their battle continued to ramp up in spite of her protests. Especially you, Miss Battledress. You've got some nerve trying to take my head like that. Saber's gaze snapped toward her, eyes blazing like bale of fire, and something in Rin quailed. Sorry? She squeaked. Ho? An armored boot cannoned through Castor's deteriorating guard, cracking his ribs and hurling him away with a startled yowl. Even as he tumbled across the ground, Saber, never once taking her gaze from her, pointedly unleashed a fresh blast with her sword to send Rin's servant slamming deep into the grove like a golden meteor. As the trees toppled down onto her ally, the dark warrior advanced on her, dragging that corrupted sword in her wake like a reaper's scythe. You insult me so openly? A small, cold smile plucked at the edge of her mouth. Bold of you, Rin. It's nice to see that some things never change. The blackhead skittered backward like a drunken spider and reflexively readied again a spell, ineffective though it would be. Something about the way she just spoken now sent chills shooting down her spine. You know me? Those wild golden orbs narrowed and her sword swung up, blazing blackly. Oh yes, she crooned. All too well. And that is why you must die. Something unholy danced in those eerie eyes. For my wish. A flicker of crimson in the back of Rin's peripherals caught her eye a heartbeat before Castor reappeared. Even as Saber brought the sword screaming down, even as Rin cried out and tried to throw herself to safety, so too did Naruto throw himself between them. There was no word nor warning. On moment she saw her own pale reflection in the surface of Excalibur. The next, someone seized her by the scruff of her neck and hauled her out of harm's way like a recalcitrant puppy. It was a clumsy move, one born of equal parts desperation and fear, one that left him well within the blazing blade's path. He had no time to spirit himself away or dodge aside at the last moment. Nor did Saber hesitate. Uncaring for its new target, her weapon split his staff and sank into his collarbone, biting deep through the meat of his right shoulder to nearly split him in half. To his credit, Castor did not scream. He didn't even stagger. His eyes only widened. Rin felt the blood drain from her face. No. A moment of stony silence flowed between both parties, then, in an incredible show of defiance, her servant roared and lurched into the tainted blade to smash his now open palm into Saber's armored chest. Strange scrawling runic script burst from his fingers to coat the armor and the skin beneath. T10 with a squeal of sundered steel, the heavy plating tore itself from her shoulders as though it had a will of its own and crumpled like wet tissue paper. Revealed was Saber's shock, just as much as that daring black dress lurking beneath. To her credit, the servant of the sword realized her peril and reacted near instantaneously, backhanding him in a cloud of smoke. Rin realized her savior was a copy, if only because of the white haze that followed its death, and her heart fluttered in silent relief. He must have reinforced the copy to take a second hit. Still! That idiot! Scaring her like that! How dare he! She nearly shouted, but remembered the ghastly girl standing before her, and quickly bit her cheek. Saber possessed no such knowledge and gaped at the fading smoke in a rare moment of confusion and exasperated anger. In his haste to rescue her, Naruto's clone had hurled her well behind his fellow blonde. Maybe, if she just crept away quietly, she might escape her notice. A hand closed around her shoulder, and she nearly yelped outright before she recognized the owner of said palm. "Be quiet," a familiar, halting voice warned her. "Very quiet." "Brynhilde?" Naruto's lancer flicked her a quick worried look, idly noting the cuts on her face and arms. Something shifted in her stoic visage. Then all at once she gathered the black cat into her arms and moved. Rin, on the verge of arguing against being picked up at all, suddenly found herself yelping and clinging onto the servant for dear life when she took off at a mad dash into the forest. "What are you doing?" Naruto said. "To keep you safe," she answered in her own, eerie way. Sputtering, she tried to right herself to no avail. "No! Stop! Forget about me! Help Castor!" For all her protests, Lancer's grip on her was as iron, and in no time at all she found herself bodily dragged away from the ensuing chaos. "You flee, coward!" Saber's voice roared behind them, only to end in a startled grunt as another unseen assault staggered her. In the end, Rin needn't have worried about further pursuit, for Artoria suddenly found herself quite preoccupied in the following minutes. A yellow flash arced to her right, and the corrupted Saber swatted at it with a snarl, only to miss her target yet again by a hair's breadth. Another suck strike met naught but empty air, while her attack struck a pauldron from her right shoulder, prompting a growl from the armored king as she spun away. "What sorcery is this?" she hissed, hefting Excalibur curiously. "Where have you gone, Castor?" Muted laughter rose from windblown tress to mock her. "Show yourself!" Orbs of poisoned gold shifted toward the trees, demanding recompense for this temerity. But none came. No assault followed, though she left herself well open in an attempt to goad him out. Her instincts bristled and she struck out blindly at her flank, narrowly deflecting an attack that might have taken her head. By the time she brought her blade about again, her prey was long gone. In his place lay a broke kunai wrapped with more of that strange runic script of before. In a fit of pique she kicked it away, only to find herself set upon yet again by little more than a golden blur. He dared not face her directly, his class was too weak in close combat. So he relied on guerrilla attacks, or so she reasoned. "Craven. Though I suppose I'm the same, now," a small, bitter black voice laughed in the back of her head. "All the same, he struck me. For that, he dies." This war was confusing enough for her already. Truly, this was the last thing she'd expected. She'd thought to face Medea as Castor as before, not this newcomer. She'd felt her blade sink into flesh, seen the light dim in his eyes. Yet when she'd struck him a second time, he'd fallen apart like an illusion. But illusions couldn't inflict damage, and this one had done just that. She could already feel the cold wind plucking at her tattered dress in silent mockery. It only fanned the flames of her rage further, her rage coalescing into a white-hot diamond in her core to keep her warm. "Face me!" she roared. "No, I don't think I will." The whiskered warrior's voice purred all around her, his once warm voice now cold with a silken menace. "You tried to take out Rin again back there. That's twice now. So I don't feel much inclined to parley with someone like you. Congratulations. You have my undivided attention. I hope it's what you wanted." Saber grit her teeth as the trees shifted around her anew. "You dare mock a king, Castor? I see no king before me. Only a tyrant." "Enough. I won't bandy words with a coward. Reveal yourself. Now. Before I burn down the forest." The world rolled around her, causing her to straighten her back. Above, then? He would attack from the treeline or the sky, trusting to his speed and the cover of the trees. Well, she was prepared for that now. The moment she saw the slightest movement, she'd unleash her noble phantasm on him, consequences be damned. Her master wasn't here to stop her. Not this time. She'd wipe out this stain, regardless of Assassin's claim, and move on to his master for good measure. She would not relive the same defeat a second time. Without warning, the original burst from the earth below her feet like a nuclear warhead. Gotcha! Clenched knuckles rammed into the altar's chin from below as the rest of the soil ruptured to make way for Castor's sudden rise, that taut fist snapping her head back with such force that she nearly bit her tongue clear off. He hit harder than she'd expected. Far harder. Momentum seized her in a cruel fist and sent her tumbling to the ground in a tangle. By the time she'd risen, Castor was there, slamming his heel into her unarmored side with a harsh crack, gone before she could strike at him again, leaving her with naught to vent her rage on but a smoking crater. "You're better than this." Rage crept in at the corners of Saber's vision as she struggled to scrape herself off the floor. "I know you are. Why go out of your way to target us?" "Shut up." Excalibur arced out in a mournful howl, and to her great dismay Castor merely leaped over it in its entirety, knees tucked into his chest. In the same fluid movement he alighted on the flat of her blade and slapped her face with his staff. Little more than a lazy jab, yet it set her already frayed temper to frothing. A vicious crosscut savaged his coat to set the trees alight, but failed to do anything more than open his cheek as he bounded backward. "'Tis but a scratch." His voice rose in jeering mummery, but she could see the anger in his eyes. "Though I can't say the same for you." "What's wrong?" Tense knuckles cracked in high warning. "Don't tell me one punch was enough to rattle you." "And who are you to mock me then?" she challenged, forcing him to dodge back again from an overhand smash. "A pawn to your master? Some dog content to do as you're bade." "I'm no pawn." His words crackled over the burning forest, burning hotter than dragonfire itself. "And who do you serve, Where's your master?" Artoria unbent enough to growl. "I have no need of him. I serve my own ambitions." She spun wildly, narrowly parrying another assault. The look he gave her across their interlocked weapons bordered on childlike pity, and it burned. "You poor, broken thing. You're King Arthur." Saber stiffened, stung by his words. "What?" "I wasn't sure at first," Castor titled his head, considering her as one would in strangely shaped cloud. "But after seeing that sword, that presence, there's no mistaking it. Even dyed in darkness, you'd be an idiot not to recognize that blade. And I'm not that dense anymore. What the hell happened to you to make you like this?" Saber grit her teeth as he regarded her over their crossed weapons. "Look, I know what I said earlier, but we really don't have to fight." He was still speaking, mistaking her silence for acceptance. "I know what it's like to be hated. To be loathed even. That was a really dark place in my life for a while. Let me help you." Something snapped deep in Saber's rotten heart at those words. Her world turned to flame. Of course Castor had no way of knowing this. Pity. She loathed pity. Least of all from a man she'd never met, one who had been leading her on a wild goose chase for the better part of the night now. He didn't realize he just trod upon a landmine. How could he? She wanted none of it. Needed none of it. Even though that hand stretched out towards her, even as a small part of her longed to accept it, the sheer hatred she had for it, for the world, for him, for everyone and everything, all of it came boiling up in an instant. "Don't touch me." Castor must have been genuinely surprised by her refusal, because for once, she finally caught him. Excalibur rejoiced as it finally tasted blood, carving a deep trench into Castor's side. This time, he didn't disappear. No, the shock in those azure orbs was all too real. Blood bubbled up between clenched teeth, but he still spun away as the king chased him down relentlessly, hammering blow after blow into his faltering guard. Yet he stubbornly made no move to strike back at her, and it ignited her rage all the more. "What do you know of it?" she raged, cursing with every blow. "What do you know of anything?" A flicker of blue in her peripherals heralded the return of Brynhilde. Saber felt some spiteful satisfaction that she'd forced the Lancer to abandon her mission and return. In her maddened state she cared not for the odds or who favored them. She'd kill her, kill him, kill all of them, grasp the Grail for herself and finally be free of this. "Stay!" Wavering on his feet, the young Castor flung up a hand before the newcomer could enter the fray. "Stay back. This is my fight." It was a surprisingly noble gesture. Saber loathed him for it. "Then die." A bloody snarl swerved with spite as she swung her sword down, but the air blurred and she found naught but a log in its place. In a heartbeat Brynhilde snatched up Naruto and sought the safety of a weathered oak before she could be targeted by the woman's unthinking battle lust. Not a moment later Saber's snarl rose in her ears anew, a harsh animal cry of pain echoing through the Einsburned forest as she gave chase. Perhaps Ilya heard it, leagues away in her mansion. Perhaps not. Or perhaps more likely this ill turn of luck would persist, and they'd all be dead by morning. Who knew? Lovely thought that. Rin was of the same mind when she saw her servant's sundered state. How are you still alive? She meant to ask that, to berate him for being so foolish. Instead she yelped. Yelped as a swathe of dark fire burst from Saber's blade and obliterated half an acre of the forest. A quick glance confirmed her worst fears. Though Lancer had saved him from dying on his feet, it seemed death had other plans for him. Oh geez, this was going to end poorly. Thus it came as something of a surprise when Naruto actually stood. Ah, Rin? Might be a good time for you and Bryn to get out of here. Find Ilya. What are you talking about, Castor? There's 2 of you and only 1 of her. Can't you just? Cast clicked his tongue in mild admonishment as the Reaper raised her blade to strike the 3 of them down. And she's likely to wipe the floor with all of us in spite of that now that I've riled her up. Nothing personal, but run. Now. Before she could challenge him, his staff struck down against the earth once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. And the world answered, banishing him and Saber to another realm. A swirl of wind, of leaf and shadow, and the 2 of them ceased to exist in this world. Belatedly, she realized Castor had just used his reality marble to pull them away from the fighting. It made sense. If he couldn't best Saber alone with his wounds, then he would bog her down with sheer numbers and overwhelm her, just as he had with Berserker. At the very least he could delay her, trap her until Heracles arrived. With a sound not unlike glass breaking, Castor reappeared a heartbeat later. He looked about as surprised as she felt. Unbelievable. He turned and spat blood. Is she pulling her power directly from the Grail or something? I don't understand. What happened? Desperate blue eyes turned to meet hers. The moment I pulled her into my reality marble, she used her noble phantasm. I've never seen anything like it before. A hand rose and he coughed harshly into it, shuddering in every breath. Everyone, they didn't have a chance to react. I won't be able to call them again for at least a day, assuming we even survive this. A chill stole over Rin as she followed Naruto's gaze to the east. What she saw there caused her to suck in a sharp breath through her teeth. Naruto's noble phantasm had devastated Heracles. Saber had broken out of it in less than a minute. Castor was covered in wounds and missing a chunk of his left ear. Saber looked nearly as fresh as a daisy, though her expression told another story. Her once bound hair hid a bloodied eye, but not her grin. She'd been pushed too far, goaded beyond the point of no return. There would be no truce here, no alliance forged. Something had broken deep inside her, yet this once proud king, her outfit in tatters, her pride flayed beyond recognition, still advanced on them. You have to die, Castor. Saber growled the words through clenched teeth, chanting them like a mantra. You have to die. So long as you live, I can have my wish. So you have to die. Once more Brynhilde stepped forward, and once more, she was waved back by Castor. Steadying himself on his staff, the battered blonde turned an irritated look on her. And what is your wish? You've been going on about it for a while now. Artoria graced him with a mad smile. Oblivion. Rin twitched. You must be joking. I do not jest, Rin. That crazed grin rounded on her with frightful clarity, and yet her voice echoed as though another were speaking through her, something horrible, something ghastly causing the blackhead to shrink back in abject horror. You're naive. Like my old self. Once I thought I could be someone else. Something more. I had hopes. Dreams. And for these idiotic hopes, I was destroyed and degraded in the same breath, shattered and left to die. No one was there for me. No one saved me. And yet, a small bitter laugh escaped her as she palmed her bloodied face. And yet the throne persists in this torture. No more. Enough of this bad joke. Still laughing, she turned her gaze to the ruined sky above. I want nothing more than an end. To erase myself, my thoughts, this corrupted form, all mention of me from the throne of heroes, from history itself. Don't you see? Her arms spread wide, as though to embrace the burning forest around them, the pale, cloudless sky overhead. Only the Grail can accomplish that. And you're in my way. You call me corrupt? Craven? I don't care. I want it to end. I'll gladly climb a mountain of bodies if it means release from this hell that you call life. Now stand aside or be cut down with your servants. You want to die? For something like that, you trample them? That's cruel. Cowardly. Rin's gaze snapped to the right as Brynhild raised her lance. For the first time since they'd met, a rare note of anger had entered the Valkyrie's voice. No, more than that, her mournful visage bore genuine emotion. She looked all of an instant from flinging herself at Saber. Only the stubborn order given by Naruto held her in check. Silence, Saber snarled. Your condemnation means nothing to me, Lancer. Who are to judge me? And yet it means everything to me. Funny how that works. Ignoring his wound, Naruto slouched upright. Stand aside? Bloodied hair shaded his eyes, hiding them from view. They did nothing to conceal his snarl. Surrender? To you? For a stupid wish like that? Fuck that. Fuck this. Fuck you. Caster, what? With a snarl, Naruto flung down his staff and raised his arms, fingers splayed toward the enemy. Golden light swarmed him, taking on the shape of a beast. Rin didn't wait to see what kind. Sensing the sudden buildup of prana, Brynhild dove to the ground, dragging the young magus with her and not a moment too soon. I'll knock that idiocy out of your head. The subsequent shockwave and scream behind it sent even Lancer stumbling, forcing the wounded warrior to drop to a knee. Though her body shielded her from the backlash, it couldn't block the sound of Naruto's attack. Nor could she fully contain the sight. Rin saw the gathering vortex and something in her went cold as she beheld the spiraling sphere of energy. Not a Rasengan. Or a Raisin Shuriken. As she looked, she felt the earth begin to tremble underfoot, just as she saw the sky rupture overhead. This was worse. Violet energy swirled out, congealing in a towering sphere before his good hand. A keening gale rose at his call, peaking louder with each passing moment. And yet Saber made no move to evade, or even raise her weapon in the least. Those pale golden eyes calmly gazed back at them, unblinking as the summoned storm battered at her face, sending her unbound flaxen tresses snapping like whips in her face. Saber! Caster Naruto roared again over the storm, his words laced with inimitable fury. You call yourself a king? Let's see you try and stop this one then, your majesty. Perhaps she sensed the danger. Regardless, the tyrant stood her ground. With a roar, he leveled the teeming mass of energy at Artoria. After all you said to me, you're not going to try to dodge this, are you? A dark look bloomed in those frigid golden eyes as she hefted her burning blade. One final clash? So be it then. Caster was clearly on his last legs and she doubted his companion's strength. Kill one, and the other would fall in short measure. Something dark had wormed its way into her thoughts, something that was even now providing her with power when she should have none. In her frenzied state she cared not a whit for it. Perhaps if she had not been pushed so far she might have realized what was happening to her. Too little. Too late. Come then. Steadying Excalibur in her good hand, she raised it high to the heavens and willed it to respond. Darkness soothed her wounds, steeping from her body into her blade. Her shadow-steeped sword swelled menacingly, cold sparks of dark crimson etching from the tattered remnants of her spiritual core. Yet she did not bring her blade down. She watched. Waited, as her enemy's attack swelled to meet her own. I knew it! By Jadama! Excalibur Morgan! This clash exceeded all others. Darkness met light and neither yielded. For a fleeting moment the stalemate endured. Shadow and flame. Saber and Caster. Two beings cut from a similar cloth, one who had given into the dark, and another who even now stubbornly fought against it. Two indomitable wills. A moment that stretched into eternity. Eventually, as all things do, one yielded to the other. Rage kindled anew in Saber's heart as she found herself slowly but inexorably being beaten back. Inch by inch. Foot by foot, she gradually gave ground. Though she ground her teeth and planted her feet against it, she still found her boots digging determinately into the soil. Small trenches formed underfoot as she sank further and further back. There was something calming about it, almost soothing. It reminded her of what her Excalibur should have been had been, once upon a time. In her mind's eye, she glimpsed the faintest outline of a familiar face. A smile she'd once held so dear to her heart. Of a hand offered in peace, just like him. Then it was gone and Artoria's world went with it. Perhaps realizing its cause to be lost, the dark forces empowering her fled all at once, leaving the last remnants of her noble phantasm to scatter in the wind. One final fleeting thought whispered through the back of her addled mind as Castor's blast plowed forward. What have I been doing? Through her, then headlong into her. If this is my end, perhaps it wasn't so bad. Saber laughed as the radiance overwhelmed her. And then there was only the light, sweet, blessed light. Chapter 10. Purity, thy name is folly. The light burned. Yet the darkness soothed. Both struck her body in a single instant. In that moment, Saber Alter's body certainly ceased to exist. As the overwhelming light of the tailed beast's bomb crashed into the blast from her Excalibur, as the resulting shockwaves sent both slamming into her soul, she found herself thrown back and swallowed up by light and dark alike. That searing luminescence flooded her soul and core, sending them spinning back to the throne in a wash of burning heat. All her memories, her experiences, the last words thrown down at her in a challenge, and her final, miserable thoughts, all were recorded in the throne. And yet, not Lekithis, not Lekithis. The entity known as Saber did not truly die. Not wholly. Not completely. A broken fragment lingered in the ashes of the attack, a tiny spark of kindling, an infinitesimal mote of dust that could barely be called a servant. A fractured piece of the original, it clung desperately on like a terrified child, holding on for dear life. There was no anger. No hate. Only mind-numbing terror. She didn't feel good. She had tasted the terror of the void and felt a piece of herself get pulled in. She didn't want to go. She wanted to survive this. She needed to endure this, somehow. Filled with fear as she was, though every second of existence was pain, she still wanted to live. So she dare not move. Dare not speak, or even move, for fear of provoking another attack. In her weakened state, anything short of a stiff breeze could kill her. She had to run. To flee. To recover. But she couldn't move. Her knees remained locked on the ground as she clenched inward, body writhing in pain. Thus it continued. The stoic silence that followed brought with it such an utter absence of light that Naruto Castor couldn't help but wonder if he missed, somehow. Lungs burning, skull aching, he didn't lower his guard for a moment. For to do so would surely invite his demise. That was his belief. Though his chest heaved and his brow ran slick with sweat, still he kept his defenses up and arms raised. If anything so much as twitched in that cloud, if there was even a glimmer of killing intent, he was fully prepared to blast it into oblivion. Naruto. Stay back. He didn't dare look away from the burning crater when Rin called out to him. How many blasts did he have left in him? 1? 2? He'd been pulling hard from his reserves and the environment around him to keep going to avoid drawing from her, but he was nearly at his limit. If she had survived that, well, he was going to have a bad time. Still, he was fully prepared to deliver an express blast of napalm straight to Saber's face as she attacked again. Brynhilde, the words tasted dry on his tongue. Go get Ilya. Now. Lancer hesitated. But your wounds. I said go. She got. So the standoff persisted, that thick black smoke not abating in the least. Rin made no move to approach when a figure resolved itself against the smoke. Naruto clenched his fingers into claws, a thin line of blood running down his left eye. Hurriedly, he thumbed it away and returned his attention to the smoke. Even the night itself seemed stained red, as though someone had torn open a hole in the sky. Surely that was just his imagination, right? He didn't even want to consider what the other servants might be up to while his attention was focused down here. Never mind the fact that most of them save Rider and Berserker were actively against him. All at once, the haze cleared. And they saw Saber. What have you done to me? Rin's jaw popped open in tandem with Naruto's. It was not the voice of a king that answered them. It was the high, reedy voice of a little girl, not a battle-hardened warrior. One might have called her battle dress white as snow, save for eerie veins of deep purple staining half of the fabric. That once heavy armor had changed as well, lessened so much like her body, now resembling little more than a light plate etched with eerie symbols. Though she still lay on her knees, her gaze was a thing to behold, for while her right eye was still the color of poisoned honey, the other had softened to a teal aqua. Even that stern face had been changed, as though time itself had come unwound in a matter of moments, rendering a cold king into a young girl. She even bore a black ribbon in her hair that most assuredly hadn't been there at the outset of their battle. But most of all, she was utterly furious with him. A lone finger stabbed at him. "You shrunk me." Naruto's right eye began to twitch. "I wouldn't say that." "What?" Mismatching eyes blinked at his response, narrowed, and looked downward. Her shout proved positively blood-curdling by comparison. "This is even worse. Why am I stuck in this form? Where has my strength gone?" As master and servant alike looked on, the altar, bolted to her feet and hastily palmed her face. Her apoplectic expression went from forlorn to thunderous in a heartbeat. Much to his surprise, she didn't draw her sword, which looked to be a different blade altogether now that he got a closer look at it, though she did storm up to him. Wow! She was right. She was even shorter than before. No surprise, given her younger body. A strange urge to pat her head welled up in him as she beat against his armored chest with mailed fists. "Monster! Lek! Fiend! You did this to me! I didn't do anything!" Heh! Rin couldn't help herself any longer. With that, she began to giggle. Softly at first, but with ever-rising intensity, as she watched the young altar flail ineffectually at Castor. This was just too much. Perhaps it was the stress of so many battles finally catching up to her. Perhaps it was guilt on her part. Perhaps it was simply the sight of Naruto holding Saber back with one hand against her forehead. No, it was definitely that. Such an abrupt and utter reversal was more than she could bear, and she didn't care if both servants saw her. "I can't, oh, this is just too much," she cried. "All of her stats have dropped by at least a rank or more. She's as harmless as a kitten." Saber snarled. "I will end you, Tosaka." Naruto sighed. Somehow, I just don't feel like fighting anymore." A dagger burst out of his chest. And the world just stopped. There had been no warning. No time to prepare. Not even a hint of his attacker's presence or killing intent before they struck. Just a knife in his back, a cruel and jagged dagger that punctured a lung before erupting out of his upper torso like a grisly creature giving birth. It wasn't Saber. Artoria looked just as horrified as he felt, and her hands were empty as she jerked away from him. And the attack had come from behind, while Rin was off to his side and well in his view. He could see her ashen face now, distantly hear her screaming as he coughed up blood. Shock paralyzed him, leaving his body all but reeling even as an armored hand settled against his shoulder. Wait! Hadn't he seen that? That hand, somewhere before? "Nothing personal, kid," a familiar voice hissed in his ear. "But orders are orders. And I can't afford to wait around any longer while you screw around." With that, the knife tore free from his body and sent him stumbling forward. Naruto struck blindly, but his fist found empty air. Mild laughter greeted him as he spun, searching for his attacker, only to find empty air. He could see Saber reeling, bleeding from a gut wound, but he barely paid her any mind. This was assassin. It had to be. No one else could conceal themselves so well. Which meant, Rin. Instinct compelled him to act, to move, and he threw himself between Rin and the attack that he knew was coming, would be coming any second now. "Rin! Run!" And the knife found him once more. Pain blazed through his shoulder, but he fought it down and lashed out again. "Whoa there!" Anew, that eerily calm laugh mocked him. "Almost got me that time." This time, his knuckles brushed skin, but the knife slid under his elbow in recompense for his temerity. "Stop!" He willed himself to focus. You're all right. This won't kill you. Not immediately. Stop. Think. Why can't I think? Why do I feel numb? Blinking through blurry eyes, Naruto forced himself to stand once more and breathe with his ruined lungs. To think. Move. When he created a trio of clones, they were immediately cut down, but it bought him time. 3 seconds. When that damned shadowy knife came for him again, he caught it this time, and both his attackers' wrists with it. Though his vision still swam like a raft in a storm-tossed sea, the blonde managed a brief, lucid moment of coherency. Then he headbutted them with every bit of strength he had left in him. Their cry of pain was poignantly familiar, but worse was their visage. He saw it. No. Naruto immediately wished he hadn't. Yes. Because in that moment he'd seen their face just before impact. No. He saw them now as they stumbled away, clutching at their bloody nose, heard them swear and curse like a sailor. Yes. Well, aren't you just determined? Assassin spat the last word as though it were a curse. You actually managed to hit me like that. No! He watched them straighten up, pull a shaggy mane of white hair out of their face, and stand. Their blank, glassy expression hurt him more than the words that followed. I don't know whether I should be impressed, or annoyed. This was his teacher, his mentor, his friend, one of the few people he'd actively looked up to and respected before the end. He'd been his godfather, a surrogate parent to him during those 3 years. The man who had taught him so much, only to die at the hands of a former student without so much as a goodbye. And now, he was here. Attacking him. Trying to kill him. He couldn't speak. Couldn't think. Couldn't even begin to breathe, such is the fervor of his mind. Some small part of him wanted nothing more than to offer mercy, even as that knife slammed into his gut, and yet. Jiraiya. Assassin sighed. Well, you got me. Groaning, he picked himself up. I don't have time to explain, you shitty brat. Just hold still, OMPH? Clenched knuckles barreled into his solar plexus, bearing all the force of a high-powered Rasengan, and sent him reeling. Before he could even hope to get a word in edgewise, he heard an all-too-familiar roar as his face found itself dragged into a screaming knee. A spinning kick shattered his nose again, flowing into a vicious uppercut that left a decidedly Jiraiya-shaped impression against the nearest tree. He looked up just in time to find himself face to face with a teeming mass of light. When the hell did you learn how to? For Rin, it was like watching a nightmare. Even as she watched Castor blast Assassin away into the woods, so too did she see her servant stagger. His body was failing him, his reserves little more than fumes. Frantically, she attempted to direct more magical energy to him in the vain attempt to kickstart his regeneration. He only straightened with a soft wheeze. No. It didn't make any sense. He should be healing. Why wasn't he healing? If this kept up, if things continued as they were, he would. Naruto stepped forward, heedless of his wounds. Huh! And his legs betrayed him, buckling beneath him like rotten driftwood to leave him sprawled out in the dirt. Ah! Finally feeling it now, are you? Jiraiya's smile seemed almost miserable by comparison as he emerged unharmed from the loamy soil, the words muffled as though he were speaking through a heavy cloth. Took long enough, I suppose? I had to coat a nasty brew on that kunai just to slow you down. Took forever to make, but looks like it was worth it. A harsh kick hammered home into his chin, catapulting him backward through a tree. Not a heartbeat later, the ruined remnants of that same tree sailed right back at him at breakneck speed. Assassin didn't even deign to dodge. There was no need. He simply slapped the tumbling trunk away with the back of his hand, vaulted the next, and drove a heel into his stomach. Stubborn, eh? He growled. Fine. Looks like I'll have to cripple you a little. A hand slammed into his gut, and this time there was pain. 5-pronged seal. When had he last felt agony like this? It was as if someone had slammed a door on his last, faltering reserves, locking them behind an impregnable barrier. Try as he might, he couldn't pull any energy to himself, couldn't even muster the strength to stand. He glimpsed the dagger as it flew at his face, followed by a blur of tattered white and purple. He couldn't bring himself to get up and help her. The taint had claimed his arms too now. It was all he could do to drag himself forward after them. You! Saber swore as she slammed into Assassin. You lied to me. You used me. He backhanded her with ease, sending her sprawling into the dirt. I'm a shinobi, sweetheart. It's kinda my shtick these days. Then his gaze turned towards a backpedaling Tosaka. I don't understand. Why would you? I could never beat the two of them in a fair fight. A small, lopsided laugh leaked into the air. Me? As an assassin? Don't be ridiculous. I planned this from the start. Now that your precious allies have worn one another down, I rather like my odds this time around. And now, then, game over, kiddo. Rin tried to dodge, to flee, to do as she'd been told. She really, truly did. But he was just so damned fast. She scarcely felt his fist thunder into her stomach before her eyes rolled back in her head. It wasn't a cruel blow, or even a killing one. He simply knocked her out. Even as her eyes rolled back in her head and she pitched forward, Jiraiya was there to catch her. In one smooth movement he slung her over his shoulder, while the other grasped a knife. Anyone else want to interfere? A distant roar from the trees answered him. Oh shit! He swore softly. That's Berserker. Time to dash. With his captive in hand, he turned to flee. And someone stopped him. Until this moment Shiro had been silent, resigned to lurk in the background as everyone duked it out. He had looked on with horror as events spiraled helplessly out of control, unable to do anything more than watch. He was out of his league here. He knew that. He didn't hold any animosity toward Tosaka. Hell, he barely even knew her. But when Castor and Saber fell to a vicious sneak attack, he knew what had to be done. He did not hesitate. He did his duty. Though he didn't know how to fight, not in the traditional sense of the word, he still acted. Still held true to his cherished ideals, the odd belief that had sustained his existence until this very moment. No, all told, Shiro Amiya couldn't do much. But he could grab Assassin. It was little more than an act of desperation on his part, a pitiful attempt to stall for time until help arrived. His heart was in the right place. Assassin frowned. Let go, kid. The boy shook his head and the servant clicked his tongue in annoyance. It pains me to do this, brat. It really does. But you're in the way. Last chance? Move or I make you. No! I won't back down. A growl greeted his ears. Fine. Then you're coming with her. Shiro opened his mouth to reply, only to grunt as a clenched fist sheathed itself in his stomach with blinding speed. It would have been easy to turn that arm into a point, to pierce his stomach. Yet he didn't. Instead, breath burst from the boy's lungs and he bent double in an explosive gasp. Twin palms clapped over his ears, deafening him. Even as he turned to face the enigmatic servant, another hand blitzed into the side of his head at cruel speed, rendering his world black. Reeling, eyes rolling in his head, he collapsed. The last he heard was a bitter growl. Rather, he saw his lips move. Sweet dreams, hero. Naruto saw it all, helpless to do anything other than twitch. Gee, why? That familiar face turned back to him. Yes, that's it. That's the look I wanted to see. Come after me, kid. Come to the mountain. Let's put an end to this. Naruto reached for him, to no avail. He couldn't find the strength. And then he tumbled into the black. 000. He didn't expect to wake up. Yet he did all the same, and immediately wished he hadn't. It began as a dull ache in his chest, one that swiftly warped into blazing agony as someone forced him awake. He moaned. A small, cool hand settled against his forehead. Another pressed a tall, cold glass of something to his cracked lips. He accepted it in stoic silence but didn't drink, not yet. His mind was too blurred, his body too broken, his wounds too great. It was all he could do just to hold his body together and will himself to heal. It had been a close thing. He nearly died, but someone had dragged him back, somehow. Where? He rasped out the question. His savior only pressed a drink to his lips all the more. Drink. It was as much a request as a command, and he abided by it. A wash of cool water ran down his parched throat, bringing with it a vague sense of relief. Sleep-gummed eyes creaked open to find a pair of mismatched eyes gazing back at him, her fair face framed by the light of the rising sun. Had he really been out that long? Belatedly, he realized his head was resting in her lap. Though her brow was fraught with tension, she made no move to dislodge his head, nor did she attempt to shake him off. Hey, Saber. The words emerged as a rusty chuckle and earned him a flick on the forehead, one he ignored. How long? You were out for much of the night, came the stoic response. We brought you to a ley line to heal. Wait. A flash of recognition hit. Rin! With a yelp, the blonde tried to jolt upright, only to find his head forced back down a heartbeat later. Gone, came the stoic reply. Assassin took both of our masters and left us to die. Ilya and Berserker are out looking for them. Brynhildr and I have been tasked with watching you. She turned her face aside, and for a moment, he thought he glimpsed a flush in her rosy cheeks. Seeing you like this, distressed her, so she elected to watch the perimeter. I need to. You will do no such thing. Her voice cracked like a whip, halting him. If you face assassin or any servant as you are now, you will perish. Her words brought a frown to his face. Yet he didn't kill us. Or them. We'd know if he did. So why? Artoria flicked his forehead again, but lightly this time. What are you implying? Don't know yet. Naruto grumbled back. Gotta get the seal off first. You may have some of my energy then. She relented. Eh? He blinked. I don't really need it though. Another flick. Just shut up and accept my generosity. An expert in seals Naruto most assuredly was not, but he didn't need to be in this. He could feel the hasty how unlike Jiraiya and shoddy work done to him. It had been a rush job, something done in a hurry. When his mind threatened to spiral back into depression again, he stubbornly took hold of it and focused all his remaining energy on the task at hand. Something like this, he could break. He was terribly good at breaking things when he was angry, and right now he was absolutely furious. Working in tandem, they had the cumbersome seal popped in less than a minute. The poison was another matter. No amount of energy could force his system to flush it out any faster than he already had, not with so many wounds and a recently healed lung. No, the taint was already in his bloodstream. For better or worse, he'd just have to let it run its course. Which meant more waiting. He loathed waiting. He felt sleepy, sluggish even, but his emotions still burned white-hot with confusion and anxiety. He was missing something here, but what? Jiraiya wasn't an idiot. He may play a fool when it suited him, but he was lethal in a fight. Downright dangerous, really. So why were they alive? He dealt them horrible wounds and paralyzed them both. They'd been at his mercy. So why? When Saber tried to rise, he snatched at her wrist. If you are concerned for me, do not be. I formed a contract with the Einsburn girl. She confessed, idly rubbing at his hand. It was necessary. I was on the verge of disappearing, although why she insists on calling me Baber, I know not. No, that's not it. He muttered. That guy, Jiraiya, he's smart. You're not making any sense. Just listen. Naruto barked at Artoria when she tried to interrupt him. If the old pervert wanted us dead, we would be dead. I think something's up here, but I can't figure it out. Those odd eyes narrowed. You believe he spared us deliberately, then? I don't know, maybe? The former shinobi shrugged hopelessly. Probably? He must have. Naruto, that's naive at best, foolish as worst. Her rebuke was as sharp as it was instant. I don't know who assassin is to you, but this. Aha! He flashed a bleary smile at her. You finally said my name? Without trying to kill me, at that. I knew you were a good person, Artoria. Her pale cheeks turned rosy again. Idiot. Naruto let the half-hearted insult roll off his back, but inwardly, his mind was racing. A good person. Jiraiya was a good person. One who'd spared them. Deliberately. And the way he'd acted, as if he'd been in pain. I think he wants to die. The words tumbled out of him before he could think to hold them back. That's the only explanation I can think of that makes a lick of sense. Why else would he turn us against each other, if only to spare us? Even weakened, we nearly got the better of him. Which meant he wanted to get our attention. And all that was without Berserker and Brin, whom we'll be taking with us when we raid wherever he decided to hole himself up. Who does that leave for him to ally himself with, then? An almost pleasant smile greeted him as Artoria came to the same conclusion. Archer, Lancer, and Rider. I think Rider's probably on our side. Just trust me on this one, alright? Naruto demurred at her baffled look. It's complicated. I have a feeling. It doesn't change the fact that he's up to something. Saber shot back. You might be wrong. True, I might be. He countered. Which is why we need to be prepared. Saber held her tongue for a long moment, her expression tense as she absently patted his head. Of course, he had no way of knowing her thoughts, no way of seeing the internal conflict that had only now come to a close in the shadowy corridors of her mind. Caster Naruto, she reminded herself, refused to give up. He'd sworn to beat several foolish notions out of her head, and so he had. But just now he'd helped to crystallize her resolve in a rather unexpected way, one no one could have predicted. Why goes this far for assassin? She sighed. What is he to you? He beamed back at her. He's my teacher. My friend. She pulled his hair. Naruto, he tried to kill you. Still my friend, Saber. Artoria dithered for another long moment, considering the smiling face sprawled out in her lap with mild concern. She hadn't stopped stroking his hair, she realized. Even then her hand traitor continued to thread through those flaxen tresses seemingly of its own accord. How long had it been since she'd had that kind of a resolve? The will to make a former friend turn enemy, back into a friend again? Too long. If only she'd had that kind of conviction from the start. How much better would her life have been? Instead, she'd pushed others' way and lived ruled alone until the very moment of her first death. And yet here it was, that same burning sense of raw hope that left her senses in disarray. Really, it only left one thing to say. You act as a true king should. I'm sorry to have doubted you. Her companion blinked. Well, that's unexpected, but thanks I guess MNPH? In a blur, she unbent enough to lower her head and press her mouth fully against his. Naruto croaked out a low laugh of his own as she pulled away. Pretty sure what you just did was illegal. This time, when Artoria flicked his forehead, there could be no mistaking her small, stubborn smile. Oh, shut up! That's it for part 3. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.